The sun hung low on the horizon, casting long shadows across the dusty plains of Montana Territory. Sarah Chen clutched her bleeding shoulder, her small frame trembling as she stumbled through the tall grass, her 6-year-old daughter Ming clinging to her tattered skirts. They had been running for what felt like hours, ever since the men from the neighboring settlement had attacked their modest homestead, shouting slurs and setting fire to the small vegetable garden Sarah had spent months cultivating. "You're not going anywhere," Jacob said, and his tone left no room for argument. The gentleness in his eyes remained, but his voice carried the weight of absolute certainty. "You're hurt, your daughter's exhausted, and I'll not send you back out there to be hunted like animals." "But they come for you too," Sarah protested weakly. Jacob's expression hardened into something resembling granite. "Let them come." Over the next few days, Sarah began to understand the peculiar world of Jacob Morrison. Despite his fearsome appearance, a giant of a man with fists like sledgehammers and a reputation that preceded him throughout the territory, he possessed a gentle soul that seemed at odds with his physical presence. She watched as he carefully repaired Ming's torn doll with surprising dexterity, his enormous fingers working the needle with patient precision. She observed him spending an hour helping a newborn calf to its feet, speaking in soothing tones until the creature found its strength. Mrs. O'Brien, his housekeeper, explained that Jacob had inherited the ranch from his father and built it into one of the most successful operations in Montana. But success had come with a price: loneliness. His size had always set him apart, making him an object of curiosity, fear, or ridicule. He'd never married, never had children of his own, and lived a largely solitary existence save for his employees and the occasional business associate. "He's got the biggest heart in Montana," Mrs. O'Brien said, kneading bread dough with practiced efficiency. Just nobody ever bothered to look past the outside to see it. Until now, maybe. Sarah found herself drawn to this contradiction of a man, fierce yet gentle, imposing yet kind. She began helping around the ranch as her shoulder healed, insisting on earning her keep despite Jacob's protests. She cooked traditional Chinese meals that filled the house with unfamiliar but delicious aromas. Ming, slowly emerging from her shell, began following Jacob around like a shadow, chattering in broken English about everything and nothing. Then, on the 8th day, the men came. Sarah was hanging laundry when she heard the horses. 6 riders approached the ranch, hard-faced men carrying rifles across their saddles. She recognized 3 of them from the attack on her homestead. Her blood ran cold, and she immediately called for Ming, who was playing near the barn. Jacob emerged from the stable, and Sarah saw his expression shift into something she hadn't witnessed before: cold, calculated fury barely held in check. He'd known they would come, had been preparing for this moment. "That's far enough," Jacob called out when the riders were 50 yards from the main house. His voice carried across the distance like thunder. The leader, a thin man with a scar across his cheek, sneered. "We're here for the Chinese woman and her brat, Morrison. Hand them over, and there won't be trouble." "There's going to be trouble either way," Jacob replied calmly. "The only question is whether you're smart enough to ride away while you still can." The scarred man laughed, and his companions joined in. 6 against 1, Morrison. Even a giant bleeds. Jacob took a step forward, and something in his movement made several of the horses skitter nervously. "I've worked with my hands my whole life. Built this ranch from timber and stone. Broke horses that other men said couldn't be broken. Moved boulders that 10 men together couldn't budge." He paused, his massive frame seeming to expand with barely contained power. "You really want to find out what these hands can do to flesh and bone?" The confidence in the riders' faces flickered. They'd heard stories about Jacob Morrison, tales that bordered on legend. How he'd once stopped a charging bull with his bare hands. How he'd single-handedly fought off a grizzly bear that had wandered onto his property. How no man in the territory had ever bested him in a fight, and many had tried. "We got guns," one of the other men said, but his voice wavered. "And I got righteousness on my side," Jacob replied. "That woman and child are under my protection. They're guests in my home. And where I come from, you don't harm guests. You want them, you'll have to go through me." The standoff lasted for what felt like an eternity. Sarah watched from the porch, holding Ming close, her heart pounding. She could see the calculations happening in the riders' minds. Was their hatred worth risking their lives? Was pride worth dying for? The scarred man's hand moved toward his rifle, and suddenly Jacob was in motion. For a man of his size, he moved with shocking speed. He crossed the distance in 3 massive strides, grabbed the horse's bridle with one hand, and yanked the rider from his saddle with the other. The man hit the ground hard, and before his companions could react, Jacob had disarmed him and stood holding the rifle like a toy. "Last chance," Jacob said quietly. "Ride away. Don't come back. Tell everyone you know that Sarah Chan and her daughter are under Morrison protection, and anyone who troubles them answers to me." The other riders exchanged glances. Their leader groaned on the ground, clutching his ribs. The math was simple. Even with guns, rushing Jacob Morrison was likely to end with several of them dead or broken. And for what? To satisfy hatred that suddenly seemed far less important than survival? One by one, they turned their horses. The scarred man scrambled to his feet and limped toward his mount, shooting venomous looks at Jacob but saying nothing. Within minutes, they were riding away, dust rising behind them. Jacob watched until they disappeared from view, then turned to find Sarah standing on the porch, tears streaming down her face. "You could have died," she said. "Maybe," Jacob replied, walking back toward the house. "But I wouldn't have been able to live with myself if I'd let them take you." He paused, looking down at Ming, who had run to him and wrapped her small arms around his leg. "Besides, I've been alone a long time. Nice having voices in the house again." That evening, as they sat down to dinner, Sarah's cooking complemented by Mrs. O'Brien's fresh bread, Jacob cleared his throat awkwardly. "Been thinking," he said. "This ranch is big. Plenty of room. Plenty of work, too. Could use someone who knows their way around a garden. Maybe teach me some of those Chinese cooking techniques." He looked at Sarah, his expression earnest despite his imposing appearance. "You're going with me," he said. "Not as a temporary guest, but permanently. You and Ming. If you'll have us, that is. This can be your home." Sarah felt tears well up again, but this time they were different. Tears of relief, gratitude, and something else she couldn't quite name. In this rough land that had shown her so much cruelty, she had found unexpected sanctuary in the shadow of a gentle giant. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, we stay." Ming cheered, and even Mrs. O'Brien dabbed at her eyes with her apron. Outside, the Montana sun set in brilliant shades of orange and gold, painting the sky above the Morrison Ranch, a place where the broken could find healing, where the hunted could find refuge, and where a lonely giant and a wounded mother had found, against all odds, the beginnings of a family.